Hello again, everybody. And if you joined in today, you probably just like to hear me yap about photography, or you want to learn something about how to use 28mm lenses, or both. 28mm lenses have been my go-to for the past year, and they are actually my favorite focal length. But we have gotten a long way because initially 28mm lenses was a struggle for me. There was simply so much in the frame, and while on 50mm, on 85mm, you can just crop out what's on the edges on the frame and possibly distracting from the main element in your scene. 28mm is so wide that it's really hard to get clean compositions. Additionally, while on a 50mm, on 85mm, you can just blur out the background. You might already have noticed that this is much harder on a 28mm lens because even if you shoot at f2 or at f1.4, it's gonna be hard to blur out the background, meaning that distractions will still be visible in your photo. So in today's video, I want to share with you everything I have learned using wide-angle lenses, and at the end of the video, I really hope that some of the ideas or concepts I introduce you to will also be useful in your photography and will make 28mm a so much more enjoyable experience for you. And with that being said, let's jump into the video. Alright, so the first thing we need to be talking about when talking 28mm lenses and how to use them is a strong subject. Because if you have a lot of distractions in your scene, but you have a strong subject and the viewer is immediately able to recognize within the first second what your subject is, then your photo immediately has much more impact. So how are we actually going to achieve a strong main subject? One way to do this is to work with the light and having good light in general. What is good light? Arguably a very subjective question, but in my opinion, good light is light that's directly hitting your subject and at the same time not coming from right above. So if we consider, for instance, the sun, that is a direct light source, but if it's standing right above your subject and coming down like this, it's essentially gonna lit your entire scene equally. And in this case, it is really hard to make your subject stand out because everything is lit equally. However, if you have, for instance, morning light or evening light, it's going to be easier to make your subject stand out. Because if you, for instance, backlit your scene and you place your subject close to the main light source of your scene, then it's going to be able to make your subject pop out even if there is distractions. Another approach on how to make your subject stand out is to simply move closer. And yes, this is a pretty scary idea because if you shoot at a 28mm lens, it's going to be hard to move closer unnoticed. But Robert Capa, a very famous photographer, once said, if your photo is not good enough, then you are not close enough. And what he probably meant by that is that your photo or your subject was probably not impactful enough in your scene, so move closer to your subject in order to make sure that every viewer knows exactly what your scene is about. Alright, the next thing we need to talk about is distractions. And as we have established in the introduction, distractions is either gonna make or break your scene, especially on wide-angle lenses, simply because it's so hard to get rid of distractions. So how are we actually going to get rid of these distractions? And there again, I have two ways to make sure to do so. The first one is to use the so-called blocking off technique. And what it effectively does is it's gonna block off a part of your frame by, for instance, putting your camera close to a wall or close to a fence, effectively guiding the viewer's eye toward a part of your frame that's more interesting and where you have your main subject standing. And by using this blocking off technique, it effectively allows you to hide some of the distractions within your scene by using this element that you use to block off a part of your frame. The second way to get rid of distractions is again to take advantage of good light. And while good light and direct light can make your subject stand out as established in your previous section, it will also mean that you can cover up some of the distractions in your wide-angle shots in the shadows of your scene. Because where there is light, there is also shadow. And use this shadow area to your advantage, use it to hide some of the distracting elements in your scene and therefore make your composition clearer, and it will make your subject stand out. But the final aspect that you need to master if you want to master 28mm photography is compositions. And while there is so many compositional techniques out there, like for instance the rule of thirds and rules that can be applied to every focal length, there is some compositional techniques that are more relevant for 28mm photography than others. And the compositional technique that I use in 80% of my 28mm photos is leading lines. And leading lines are effectively lines that you find in your environment that lead deeper into your scene and preferably toward your subject. And if you walk around with your 28mm lens, there is so many ways to use leading lines in your surroundings. So leading lines can, for instance, be fences that you find and that just make this natural line toward your subject. You just have to wait for the right subject to pass through. You can also use paths or just small ways that lead deeper into your scene, preferably toward your subject. You can also use alleys, for instance, because there is this massive alley just leading down into the distance, deeper into your scene. But at the same time, you can also use shadows, for instance. Shadows, because they are long and they are linear, they can actually make for visual interest, guiding the viewer's eye toward your subject where the shadow initially came from. But you can also use sidewalks, for instance, and you can just use the line created by the sidewalk to lead toward your subject. So there is endless possibilities on how to use leading lines in your scene, and you just need to practice yourself and using these leading lines to support your main subject. All right, what did we learn today? Well, first of all, you need to have a strong subject in your 28mm composition, either by placing it into the brightest area of your scene or by just physically moving closer to your subject, therefore making it more obvious. Additionally, we have talked about distractions and how to get rid of them, mainly by using this so-called block-off technique, effectively using a fence, a wall to cover up a part of your scene, therefore removing distractions and actively guiding the viewer's eye toward a part of your scene that's more interesting. And finally, we have talked about composition and how particularly leading lines are useful in your 28mm photography to guide the viewer's eye toward the center of your composition and toward your subject. And if you enjoyed today's video, you might consider subscribing to the channel or leaving a like on the video. And if you have any other wide-angle photography tips, make sure to drop them in the comment section because they could be useful for everybody in this photography community. And with that being said, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.